Good morning. I'd like to welcome His Excellency, the Ambassador of Korea to Singapore, Ambassador An, and all of you to this SICC meeting today. Mindfulness at work, developing the right mindset. And we all know how critical the right mindset is in order for us to achieve our goals, our ambitions, and also to positively impact others and our society. This event is organized in conjunction with Prudential's Building Better Business initiative. And I'd like to thank Prudential for its continuing support of the Chamber. Our speaker today is Mr. Ronnie Sabnani, the Managing Principal of Infinye. And before Ronnie speaks with us, it's my pleasure to introduce Julian Chi, who's head of the business segment at Prudential. So Julian, welcome, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very good morning to all of you. It is a privilege and pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm very grateful to SICC for their kind invitation to give the opening address. We all recognize that employees are at the core of every business. And businesses are evolving the way they care for their employees, going beyond simple medical needs to a deeper and wider focus on total employee well-being. At Prudential, we believe in innovating beyond insurance. Our solutions provide an integrated suite of services that extend beyond employee insurance to caring for employees in a holistic manner through one seamless digital experience. In addition, we've recently launched an industry-first initiative in collaboration with SkillsFuture Singapore. The SME Skills Accelerator program will equip employees with future-ready skills and help them develop a growth mindset at work. I personally believe that mindfulness is the start and core enabler of achieving lasting and genuine well-being and wellness. It enables us to recognize and break unhealthy habits and to form lifelong positive ones. With that, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Mr. Ronnie Sabnani, Managing Principal of Infinye Incorporated. Over to you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Julian. And good morning, His Excellency. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Thank you all for taking the time to join us on what is the start of what we feel would be a very valuable series that will be running throughout in conjunction with SICC throughout the rest of 2021. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this very first aspect around mindfulness, specifically mindfulness at work. We have seen quite a bit of change in the way we've all had to deal with work issues, with the work situation in the last 12 to 18 months. And needless to say, it's obviously caused a great deal of impact in the way we go about interacting with one another, family at home, friends, and just as importantly, colleagues at work. So we're going to take you through a journey throughout the rest of this year, but starting with today, on how we can leverage an understanding of mindfulness and see how best to apply that in the work situation. But what you'll see as we go through our sessions today is that the knowledge, the learnings that we're sharing with the rest of you would put you in good stead to deal with any particular situation and not just at work. So I want to start off by sharing my screen. So just give me a sec and I'll just hop over to my deck. And just to get things kicked off, everyone, what we like to do is to get a sense of where you're at in terms of your mindfulness quotient. So one of our colleagues will put up a poll right now. If you can just go ahead and answer based on this particular question. In the past 1 week, have you found yourself doing any one of these things? Select as many as you think that applies to you. In the past 1 week, have you found yourself doing any of these things? So let's see what we have from every one of us. Do you find yourself unable to remember what others have said during conversations? Do you find yourself paying more attention to your mobile phone than to your nearest and dearest? I don't know about you, but you find yourself unaware of how quickly the day went by when you were sitting in front of your computer or in front of your workstation. Let's hear what you guys have to think about that. Some interesting responses coming in. Yeah, and again, no surprise that most of us are unaware of how quickly the days go by. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that we're coming towards the end of January 2021. And each day as we go through our work, our routine, it's just amazing how time quickly ticks by. Okay, so we've got a pretty good sense. Perhaps we'll just share the results. As you can see over here, everyone, quite a few of you all have very similar perspectives in terms of how your past week would have gone through, right? A lot of us, over half of us, find ourselves finding it difficult to remember aspects around conversations that we may have just had quite recently. We find ourselves paying more attention to our mobile devices, and that's the bane of, I think, the existence for many of us in this current landscape that we're all operating in, right? And also a large number of you feel that, tend to be dwelling quite a bit on the past events and maybe perhaps dread a bit about what the future has to offer us. This is where mindfulness plays a very important role. And the advent of mindfulness in organizations, in our landscape, has picked up quite a bit in the last few years. Why is that? Well, there's been some significant outcomes that have resulted from the implementation of mindfulness initiatives, mindfulness practices. There's some interesting statistics that I'd like to share with you. One, very virtue of just spending 10 minutes a day on our well-being can make a significant difference on our overall attitude, on our overall position towards how we tackle that particular day. Many of us go from being 75% negative prior to that 10 minutes to going 99% positive after just 10 minutes in a day. Companies who have implemented mindfulness initiatives have also seen some really fantastic outcomes. They've seen a 12% increase in the focus from the employees. They've seen a 10% increase in the performance of the employees. They've seen a similar increase in efficiency across the organization, and quite a significant increase in the work-life balance, as well as in the ability to communicate between each other. So some very glaring statistics here that goes to show the impact of mindfulness in the workplace. One thing that's come across, we've seen some very key trends. And the key trends are this: across over 1,000 companies who have either adopted or implemented aspects of mindfulness, they've seen these particular benefits: a 28% reduction in stress, a 39% improvement in productivity, and of course, to the bottom line, a 17% drop in cost per employee as a result of taking a bit more focus and providing that aspect to each and every employee in any particular organization. So these are some very compelling statistics, which leads me to my next question. When we think about mindfulness, what does that really mean? We all have our own interpretation of this. And if you go on the web, do a search, you see various versions of what mindfulness actually means. Maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts and feelings, being consciously present in a task that you are currently doing. The quality or state of being conscious or aware of something, right? Intention to cultivate awareness and paying attention to what is occurring in the present moment. We've taken all of these together, and from our point of view, mindfulness is really about three core things. It means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. These are the aspects that we want to talk to you about today, as well as for the rest of the series throughout the year. And it's important that we are able to break down mindfulness from this particular aspect. Paying attention, not just paying attention regularly, but on purpose, in the present moment, and very importantly, non-judgmentally. Why are these components important? Well, it is because of the very simple fact that mindfulness transforms how we relate to events and experiences. Now, knowing this particular definition, what do you all think are the benefits of practicing mindfulness, whether at home or at work? Go ahead and put your answers on this poll that will come up now in a moment. So from this list over here, what are the three top benefits that you feel are the biggest benefits of mindfulness? Right? Out of all these things that you see over there, what are, in your opinion, the top 3 benefits that could come from implementing mindfulness? Again, no surprise there. Many of us point towards stress reduction. It's interesting to see a lot of us also feel that it helps to provide better problem-solving capabilities, enhance energy levels, helps to also build confidence, no doubt about that. Okay, so let's just go ahead and share those results. So as you can see over here, overwhelmingly, we all feel that mindfulness can have the biggest benefit on stress reduction. So I'm glad to see this, because that is very much the case when we go about and interview or interact with different individuals and organizations to get an understanding of the impact of mindfulness in that particular organization. Stress reduction is one of the biggest things. Energy levels is another key area. But if you look at some of the others, better problem-solving capabilities. Absolutely right, ladies and gentlemen. This is an area also that could be a big benefit coming out of practicing a level of mindfulness. Not to mention the other aspects over here. Now, there are multiple benefits we can talk about, but today what we want to talk about is really to say, okay, knowing what mindfulness brings to us as an individual, as well as to the organizations that we work in or lead, how do we then ensure that we take the right approach towards developing a mindfulness behavior or mindfulness culture that can be embraced by everyone? And that means we need to understand a bit more about the aspects around what are the 4 stages of mindfulness. From our point of view, it involves developing the right mindset. It also involves being able to communicate with what we refer to as intent. It also incorporates a certain level of engaging with empathy. And finally, just as importantly, being able to show leadership through the values of integrity. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be a leader to be able to do that. Every single one of us, no matter our role in an organization or at home, can practice and can demonstrate leadership with integrity. So these are the 4 areas. These 4 stages fit very nicely into our overall webinar series for this year. But specifically for today, which is what you guys are all here to learn more about, we're going to talk about how we can start with that foundational component, which is developing the right mindset. This is key towards us being able to practice mindfulness in a way that is sustaining, in a way that provides an impact not just to us, but to people around us. So when we talk about mindset, again, a plethora of definitions with regards to what mindset actually means. A fixed mental attitude or disposition, a person's way of thinking and their opinions, a person's usual attitude or mental state is his or her mindset, a mental inclination. So if you look at the various sources out there across multiple dictionaries online or at the library, you still go through some of these old school ways of looking up definitions, you see quite a variance in the way mindset is defined. We like to look at that and break it down into a simple formula. And from our perspective, what is mindset? Well, it is the sum of the knowledge that you acquire, including the beliefs and thoughts of the world around you, as well as yourself in it. So let me state that formula again. From our perspective, simple formula. Formula is the sum of the knowledge and the beliefs and thoughts of the world around you and yourself in it. Getting this very simple definition out, putting it in a formula, from our experience, allows us to be able to address aspects around how we develop the mindset in a way that's achievable, in a way that is easily managed, regardless of our background, regardless of our culture. So when we talk about mindset, from our point of view, it's really about, sorry, just give me a sec. Some reason there. My apologies for that. When we talk about the mindset, it's really about looking at the way three components play a role in developing that right mindset. What are those three components? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today for the rest of the session. One, it is the components around how we respond to visuals. Two, it is the auditory aspect. And three, it is the emotional aspect. These three components are core towards helping us develop the right mindset. So let's dive into each of these three components and talk a bit more about what they actually mean and how do we as individuals can go about developing each of these three core components. Why is that important? Well, it's very important because it contributes to having that right mindset. And what is that right mindset, ladies and gentlemen? That right mindset is one where we are able to take in information from all sorts of different sources. And that information will then provide us with the relevant insights that we can then leverage to be able to address any particular situation we come across. Again, whether at work or whether in a social or family environment. That's why having the right mindset can be a critical aspect towards us being able to engage with individuals in a much more compelling way altogether. Okay, so let's start with the first component. And when we talk about mindset, we talk about visuals. Here's something I would like you all to think about. This particular statement over here. Don't just see, absorb. Let me tell you a bit more about what I mean by that. And let me ask you guys over here. Can anyone tell me? Or let me just say, I see a few participants online. So shall I ask Joyce? You're still online. Go ahead and answer on chat or on audio if you want to. Out of the 5 senses, Joyce, that we as human beings possess, the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, the sense of touch, the sense of taste, what do you think is the most important sense and most powerful sense that we possess? I ask again, out of the 5 senses that we possess, what do you think is the most important sense? Would anyone like to venture a guess? Feel free to drop in your answers on the chat or even come off mute and shout out the answer. Is it the sense of smell, sense of hearing, sense of sight, sense of taste, sense of touch? What do you guys think is the most important sense that we as human beings possess? Yeah? So we're seeing lots of relevant and of course key answers over here. Most of you have got the right one. It is the sense of sight. Why is that? Well, quite simply, when you look at vision, when you look at the eyes particularly, it is the eyes that are quickest to respond to any stimulus around us. It is the eyes that have the ability to process a larger amount of data than any of our other senses. And here's an interesting statistic. It is the eyes, or what we see, that contributes more than 70% towards the decision or conclusion that we form about any particular situation or any particular person. So think about it. The eyes, quickest to respond to any stimulus around us. It is also the one that has the ability to process a larger amount of data than any of our other senses. And as a result, it provides more than 70% of the influencing component towards us arriving at a particular decision or a particular conclusion about a scenario or a person. So understanding the impact of visuals can go a long way towards us understanding how to develop that particular aspect of our mindset. So I'm going to come off video over here and talk to you a bit more about visuals as a component in terms of developing the right mindset. Yeah. So let me stop sharing the screen, and you should see me come on full spotlight over here. When we think about the eyes, ladies and gentlemen, there are various aspects we have to think about. One important component that I would like you to think about is how the brain responds to stimulus that come across our line of sight, right? There is a part of our brain known as the limbic system. And the limbic system in our brain is primarily responsible for driving attention towards any particular stimulus, which means it plays an important role in terms of what we focus on at which particular point in time. Now, the thing about the limbic system, everyone, is that it does not judge. It's non-judgmental. So it's as easily attracted to a sight of visual beauty as is easily distracted to something that may not be as appealing or attractive. So for us, in developing the right mindset, leveraging and understanding how that works can go a long way towards us being able to make most use of what we see and absorb and process it in a way that allows us to always address the situation in an optimum level altogether. How can this apply to the workplace? Well, a variety of ways by which you can do it. Let's talk about the basics over here, as in ourselves. If we have an environment around us which is free from a certain degree of clutter, which has elements all in place, that's what the eyes see. And to a large extent, that's what the eyes or our brain will interpret as something calming to our personality. As a result of that, we have that more relaxed state in being able to go and tackle a particular task that we have, or being able to stay more engaged in a conversation that we're having with someone else. Now, in this particular environment, where we're all primarily working from home, we've all got some level of interaction over video calls with our colleagues, with our family members around the world, more than we have that opportunity to interact physically, socially. Here is where the visual component can be a very important aspect for you to also consider. One very simple example is the way I'm talking to each of you right now, right? The ability for me to be able to engage, interact with you, even though you're all in different parts of Singapore, it gives me that ability to feel a bit closer. And I would like to think the same from your end as well. But because I have this on, this allows me to not only look into the world of the other person that I'm talking to, it also allows me to get a bit of a better understanding about that individual or that group of individuals. As all of you are listening to me, you might notice certain things around me. And that could be great ways by which we can actually direct the conversation in a direction where we want to take that. But let's pause for a moment and think about how we can take this in a non-official capacity altogether. Quite often when we get on a video conference call like this, we tend to be a bit formal. We tend to be very focused on talking about our work initiatives and tasks. And as a result, overlook some of the more softer aspects which contribute to a person's well-being. So what I would recommend to you is something that we find of immense benefit by practicing it ourselves. Have that conversation with your colleagues, with your team members, where you're not just talking about work. Set aside that time and really look at them, really see eye to eye on a particular topic that has absolutely nothing to do about work. What you'll find is that there is a remarkable increase in the level of engagement from the individuals. And it doesn't mean that they have to tidy up their environment or surroundings. All it means is that it allows you to get a glimpse into their world and for them to get a glimpse into yours. And from there, be able to take that conversation and make it a lot more meaningful. So as an example, you might have a photo lying around, like I do, which could be in the background as I'm talking to you, or it could be something right in front of me. But by having a simple photo there, by me having that ability to look at it, it allows me to remind myself to have a conversation that's a bit more personal and not so business oriented, right? So a photo like this, here's a photo of my son and me when I was a baby, right? And every time I look at this photo, it gives me that sense of relaxation. And now, of course, I can't help but smile because I think about how there's so many similarities in our looks when we were both at that particular same age. Or even a book that I might be reading. Here's something that you might want to think about. When you engage with your team members on a call like this, set aside 10 or 15 minutes and ask them, what's the latest book you're reading? Or what's the latest article that really piqued your interest? And it doesn't have to be about work. It could be about music. It could be about history. It could be about learning new cultures. It could be about learning about ancient Greek mythology, whatever it may be, right? But just having those little visual components and guides around you can go a long way towards you being able to narrow that focus and develop your mindset to be one that's not judgmental. Having those right components there that you can see allow you to get a better understanding and allow you to be more involved in the present moment. And again, as we talked about at the start, that's what mindfulness is all about. Okay, so think about some of these components as you go about practicing your interactions, specifically on platforms like Zoom, Teams, or whatever it is you might use. That does not mean that you still cannot take advantage of the fact that visuals play a very important role in developing the mindset. Let me get back to the slide and give you just one final thought around visuals to illustrate why this is important. Quite simply, 55% of our communication across any medium, across any situation is visual. So more than half of our communication is visual. If we do not have that ability, if that particular component is blocked out, that would mean for a less engaging way by which we communicate, and perhaps certain messages don't come across in the way that we want to. Okay? Now, second aspect around developing the right mindset. It's around having the ability to not just hear, but listen. And there are fundamental differences between hearing and listening. With hearing, it's accidental. It's involuntary. Oh, I heard a sound, right? It's not something that you were purposely hearing or putting your ear to the ground for. It is also highly effortless. So it's easy for all of us to be hearing things. It's easy for a lot of us to hear messages or to hear someone speak. But what's more critical in developing the right mindset is for us to develop the ability to listen. And that involves a significant more effort. The act of listening is focused. It is now voluntary as opposed to involuntary. And it is intentional. Having that ability to listen, again, gives us the opportunity to develop our mindset in a way that allows us to take in the surroundings all together and process it accordingly. So think about that. Fundamental differences between hearing and listening. You know, we can think about examples in and around our lives, you know, when our parents growing up, when our parents used to lecture us or scold us, how much of that did we really take in, as in listen? And how much of that were we just hearing and, you know, we hear the common phrase, you know, off the top of the head, or in one ear, out the other, right? That was some aspect of hearing. But if we really talk about listening, it's about being able to not just take in what you're hearing, but be intentional and focused around that particular act that you do. Why is this important? 38% of communication is auditory. So 55% was visual, 38% is auditory. So again, a significant chunk of the way we communicate comes through via our auditory senses. And that means we'll have to do a few things. One, practice the approach of being a bit more curious. With every situation we come across, it does not hurt to ask why. Why is it? Why now? Why then? Why do you feel this way? Why not? Why is it urgent? Quite often, we tend to overlook this one fundamental task. When someone gives us something to do, when someone asks us something, we quickly process it. That means we just hear, we don't really listen to the underlying messages. We quickly process it, and then we go about trying to address that particular situation. But if we pause and incorporate a bit more curiosity into the way we do this, we start to see things from a much wider perspective. When we ask why, we get a better understanding. When we ask why, we get a bit more detail. That would contribute towards us understanding a situation a lot better. And therefore, again, allowing us to develop the mindset in the right way. Another practice that we would encourage is to incorporate the practice of active listening. Now, we heard the differences between hearing and listening. What is active listening? Well, active listening involves being concentrated on the message that is being said, as opposed to passively hearing the words that were said. Active listening involves listening with all 5 senses. Now, some of you might be thinking, how is that possible? How do I listen with my sense of taste? Think about the various situations that you find yourselves in, and you can then start to see how, by being a more active listener, it allows you to really take in the various variables that contribute towards you forming a conclusion or an opinion about a certain scenario. When we practice active listening, one of the things that we always recommend is, and you've all heard this term before, don't jump to conclusions. So we've got that same concept of here with regards to active listening. When we say practice active listening, we say do not jump. What does that jump stand for? Well, firstly, let's not judge. Active listening also involves not doing any talking. So let's cut out the unnecessary talking. Let's not make it about yourself. The whole point about listening actively is listening to the other party. And just as importantly, which is again something that we've got to remind ourselves not to do, is do not prepare a response. Quite often, it seems like we are in a hurry for that person to finish a question or to finish his or her statement, and we're all ready to pounce and prepare a response. Think about it in a sales situation. Think about it in a situation where you're being asked whether you've completed a particular task. Rather than pausing, reflecting, listening to the question, listening with all senses, and instead of jumping into the conclusion, let's practice this concept of not judging, not doing unnecessary talking until we've taken in every aspect of what we're hearing, not to make it about yourself, and not to prepare a response immediately. More importantly, not to just react. Okay? So think about that as you go about developing this particular aspect in your mindset. I'll pause over here, and this is a good segue into our third component. So let me ask you guys this, and here we're going to do another poll again. What is, excuse me, What emotional state do you feel a majority of team members are in right now? So having a look at the different emotional states that are presented to you, what emotional state do you feel the majority of the team members are in right now? Go ahead and put your answers on the poll, please. Okay, some interesting ones coming up over here. Many of you are saying that they're feeling overwhelmed and perhaps stress. Several of you are also saying frustration is a key emotional state that many of them are finding themselves in. Some of them are concerned or worried about what the future has to hold for them or what the current situation they're in right now. Yeah? So these responses that you all have provided here are interesting. And it goes to tell you a bit more about what the landscape is like for us in this current climate. Knowing that a majority of our team members are either worried or concerned or have that feeling of overwhelm or being stressed, a lot of them, which is great to see, are hopeful for the future, but also a certain number are frustrated with the situation that they're finding themselves in, right? So here's an interesting statistic that I'd like to share. We took an emotional pulse from 1,000 global companies in the last year alone and asked them, what are you feeling right now across the employees that we've taken that survey for? A large majority of them overwhelmingly are feeling these three emotions: worried, concerned, anxious or afraid of what the future might bring, and of course, just as importantly, overwhelmed and stressed. Now, knowing that these emotional states are pretty much taking over the lives of our team members, how do we go about adjusting that? How do we go about addressing that? And how do we make sure we have that right mindset to be able to help them through this particular process? So here is where it is important to not just feel the emotions, but not just think about how the emotions make you feel, but look towards ways to process and reframe it. Okay? It's ideal over here that we're looking to get that balance between emotional regulation, which is something more of a science, and emotional agility, which many people are saying it's an art, but to a large extent, in my opinion, can be broken down into digestible bits that you guys can all take on and process. So when we talk about managing the emotion, there are three areas that we look at. One, in terms of how we process our emotions. And here's where there's no secret. No, don't hesitate to process the emotions in a way that they appear. Be comfortable with them. Two, challenge the story that our emotions or their emotions, the people you're talking to, are telling us. And three, have that ability to build on our emotional vocabulary. So three aspects around creating that emotional agility: processing, challenging, and building on our emotional vocabulary. Let's take one of them at a time, starting with processing. Now, a key aspect about what we do whenever we come across or we feel a certain emotions is that we tend to do one or the other, especially when it comes to a negative emotion. So many of us, when we have that feeling of negativity coming across, sad, frustrated, overwhelmed, or stressed, we'll do one of two things. We tend to either hide it or bury it or run away from it. One of these three things, right? They're more or less the same thing. What happens is that can be very detrimental to our own well-being. Trying not to actively think about something sometimes has that adverse effect, the opposite effect in terms of it magnifying much greater at a later stage. Studies have shown that smokers who actually actively try not to think about smoking end up dreaming about cigarettes and smoking and as a result, end up smoking more. One of the other things that processing of emotions also tell us is the fact that our emotions are a mirror of the values that we hold close. So if we're feeling sad, frustrated, angry, or depressed about certain situations, that's probably because one of our values that we hold dear is not being addressed or not being held in that high regard as we hold it compared to the other person. So when we're frustrated, when we get annoyed, if a colleague turns up late for an engagement or for a meeting, that's because we respect the values of punctuality. But we can't help but feel that frustration when our values are hit or compromised. And that then is demonstrated through that emotional state that we feel. There are studies that even say that by bearing those emotions, they're actually counterproductive towards us being able to become more resilient. Instead, what we would ask you to do is think about how you process your emotions, whatever they may be, positive or not so positive emotions, and be able to deal with it in a way that is sensible. One way we encourage you to do that is to acknowledge it, experience it. Don't run away from it. Don't hide it. If you are not feeling at your optimum, that's fine. Acknowledge, experience it. Give yourself the opportunity to experience it. And then when you're done with it, you then have the ability to leverage those emotions in a way that allow you to learn from it, i.e. build on that resilience. Okay? So 3 steps, simple ways by which you can process the emotions: acknowledge, experience, and leverage. Another aspect around the emotions is in terms of finding. So when we say challenge the story, find your origin story and challenge the instant or the instinctive emotion that you might feel in any particular circumstance. What you will find is, if you can drill down to that, you will find that that emotional state that you're in, or that particular emotion you're feeling at that point in time, actually traces back to something that might have happened to you in the past. In that sense, your origin story. So if someone older to you admonishes you, a parent admonishes you, or if someone at work criticizes your task or the work that you've done, and you feel to some extent a degree of perhaps incompetence, I would ask you to think about your origin story around that. Something would have happened in the past that allowed you, or that led to you creating that first feeling of incompetency in the first place. So understanding that primal story, understanding that root cause of that emotion can go a long way towards us being able to process that emotion for what it is, and then be able to move on from that. What we've found, and again, studies have shown, if we stick or hold on to that primal story, it is detrimental to our overall well-being. Third aspect, in terms of, excuse me, in terms of handling our emotions, is on building that emotional vocabulary. And this is an important aspect, everyone. When we talk about the words we use to describe any emotional state, I would ask you to think about how you can break it down even more. So instead of thinking about the word or using the word happy, think about alternative forms of what that word could actually convey. Happy could also mean content. You could mean glad. It could mean joyful. It could mean delighted. It could mean pleased, ecstatic. It could mean cheery. It could mean a whole plethora of things. By building on this emotional vocabulary, it allows us to break this one big giant emotion, specifically when it's a negative emotion like depression or sadness or anger, into small sized chunks that we could then process and address individually. Then that feeling of overwhelmness isn't so overwhelming, so to speak. That feeling of stress is much more manageable and can quickly be addressed. So build on your emotional vocabulary. And a good way to do this, ladies and gentlemen, of course, as you guys know, get onto Microsoft Word or get onto an online thesaurus. Every word that you have, build this up, put it up on your desk or your workstation, and have a list of alternative words for every single situation, for the most common words you utter. So the next time someone asks you, and if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed or stressed, instead of you saying, I am stressed, when someone asks you how you're doing, or I'm stressed, you actually have the ability to break it down into a format that they themselves can process. And when you say it out loud, those other alternative words in the vocabulary, you start to see how easy it is for you to address or leverage a particular situation, depending on that emotional state. Okay? So, few aspects around here, right? Those are the three components we talk about: visuals, auditory, and emotion. And for each of these three components, they all form the building blocks towards developing that right mindset. How do we make use of that, ladies and gentlemen? Well, few aspects which I can recommend has worked for us in all these particular scenarios we find ourselves in. And that is, again, a three-step process. Stop one particular habit that you are currently doing right now in terms of how it affects your mindset. And it could be anything. It could be quite simply, let's just stop jumping to conclusions. Let's stop judging. Let's stop dwelling on the past. What you can also do at the same time is to continue a current practice that you already have, that you're already doing. So if you are setting aside 5 minutes a day to do some form of meditation, it doesn't have to be the actual form of yogic meditation, but some form of meditation, even if it is just to rest your eyes and to shut your eyes for 5 minutes and not think about work or not think about your day, fantastic. Do go ahead and continue that. At the same time, start on something new. Based on what I've talked about, if you find yourself very quickly hearing and then acting on something you've heard, as opposed to listening actively, try to see how you can incorporate that practice into your daily life. Yeah? So 3 aspects that I would ask you to look at in terms of how you can help develop that right mindset. Stop a particular habit that you're quite used to. Continue something that you feel has worked for you really well. And then based on what we've just shared, start incorporating one of those components into your day. It's not something that can be addressed overnight. We do acknowledge that. But then having that path towards ongoing mindfulness development and enhancement, you will find yourself very quickly falling into that pattern where you're much more astute and aware of what is happening around you because your mindset is already tuned in that particular way. You are much more responsive to be able to handle any particular situation, and therefore gives you the high degree of adaptability and agility. And thirdly, you become a lot more resilient, not just to the various levels of emotional states that you will find yourself going through or people you interact going through, but also through the other stimulus that you come across on your daily interactions. Okay? So 3 aspects around developing the right mindset, 3 core components around that, and 3 simple steps in terms of how you can go about developing that right mindset. So I will pause over here and ask, is there any aspect around what we talked about that I could clarify further?
Ronnie, thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be back to moderate the Q&A. And what struck me listening to your presentation, I mean, for the average person in an office, it's a lot to process. It's a lot to internalize and then practice. And as we say in Singapore, it can appear altogether a bit cheem, a bit overly profound and deep.
Yeah.
I mean, you consult for so many businesses. What have you seen that companies are doing to help enable their teams develop mindfulness in order to achieve all the benefits that you have shared, that the statistics tell us? What are they doing that many other businesses are not doing? So how do we leverage the ability for each of us to develop a positive mindset? And then how do we bring that to work? What do companies need to do?
Great question, and thank you for asking that, Victor. So, yes, it can seem overwhelming. Yes, it can seem in the local slang can be quite cheap, right? Where we found companies being successful is when they are able to break it down into realistically achievable components. Now, the benefits of efficiency, of cost reduction, of stress reduction, they're all well and good. But if any organization embarks on a mindfulness initiative and actually has this whole spectrum of benefits that they're looking to achieve, from our experience, that would be quite difficult for them to achieve all of it. What actually ends up happening is that continued sense of overwhelming feeling and this bit and getting them to then see this situation or this initiative as yet another big project that we have to take on, right? So one of the suggestions that we normally put forward to these organizations that we work with is to say, okay, look, let's not try to boil the ocean. Let's start with 1 or 2 top priorities for you. Based on what you see, based on the feedback, and I'm sure a lot of these organizations that we've worked with, as well as the others ones like those of you on the call over here, you've all got some sort of mechanism to get a pulse of what your employees are going through, what they're feeling. Based on that feedback, what would be that top 1 or 2 things to address? From those statistics that I shared with you, primarily, most of them is all around that feeling of stress or the feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it, right? Helping these organizations understand that these are the top 1 or top 2 metrics to focus on is a good way by which they can start and embark on a mindfulness initiative. By embarking on that one, focusing on that one metric first, bringing that to that form of success, that level of success will then be apparent to everyone, including the employees who are the target of this, and they will then more likely embrace part B or part 2 of this mindfulness initiative that the organization embarks on, right? Hence the reason why, again, Victor, and for everyone as well, as you saw throughout my presentation today, I work in a very simple concept of 3s. And the definition of mindset, because of all the words that we had over there, we had a simple formula. Mindset is equals to the knowledge plus our beliefs and thoughts about the world around us. What's helped for the organizations we've worked with, when they've put a simple formula like that in front of them, on their corkboard, on their post-it note, somewhere around them, that simple act allows them to really develop the mindset in a way that's possible and really open up the possibilities by which they do not feel that everything is against them or there's just so much stuff going against them that they don't have that time or the inclination to set aside to be a bit more, to practice mindfulness.
Ronnie, thank you. And I think my thanks to the audience. They're beginning to ask questions. And yep. I think Sukan hits the nail on the head. He says, you know, a real story, obviously without mentioning names or an example, would be really useful to illustrate your points. And, you know, on Monday this week, 29 trade associations and chambers, of which SICC is one, we issued a joint statement on the responsibilities of employers and employees in the workforce. And one of the reasons we did that was to try and reestablish some sense of balance, because over the last decade or so, there's lots and lots and lots of advice, advisories, commentaries, and stipulations about what companies should be doing. But there's been virtually nothing about what employees need to think about doing. So a real example maybe of a sort of before or after, you know, what was the situation in a company before? What did they do? And then what were the results? I think would be very good for me and for the audience to sort of begin to grasp some of the concepts that you've been sharing with us.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you, Sukan, for posing that question. I think that's an exceptionally important aspect that we don't often think about when we try to address these initiatives with any organization. Now, let me tell you of a real scenario that we went through ourselves, right? Part of our mindfulness initiative involved, obviously, getting the employees together in realistic size groups. And this was obviously before COVID-19, where we had that privilege of being able to have face-to-face interactions, but getting a certain number of employees into a room. And there was one that I remember, one particular scenario where I remember, where one employee walked in. Right from the onset, you could tell that he was quite opposed to even being in that same room, right? The body language was apparent. The tone that he used at the start to say, what am I doing here? He literally stopped short of saying, why the hell am I here? This is a waste of time. But he said pretty much the same words to the same effect. Yep. Now, one of the things that we do at the start is to put everything on a level playing field. So level set the expectations. And the manager of this employee was also in the room and noticed that attitude as well. And first thing they did was that a manager did was turn to me and says, okay, look, you've got a problem person over here. And I said, look, that's not what we're here to do, right? The idea over here for anyone, and Victor, you've touched on a very important point over here. Quite often, organizations embark on initiatives without really considering the feelings or the reactions of the employees for which this initiative is targeted towards, right? So communication of why we're doing this, and more importantly, which many organizations still have trouble trying to articulate, is wording that initiative in a way that shows the employee that I, as the employer, really genuinely care about your well-being. And that is demonstrated through a variety of ways. That is demonstrated in a way by which you can give time off or recognize in a much more public forum this person's efforts, even though it may not be a significant achievement. So when they come into a room like that, thinking that here's another seminar, here's another workshop that I have to attend, I've already got 10 things on my plate, I don't need an 11th one. When they come into that, level setting the expectations at the start, and then opening up and being vulnerable. So one of the things that we did at the start was to actually come from my perspective, right? Saying, look, I want to share something very personal with each and every one of you. And I proceeded to share with them a personal story about that one time I was feeling totally overwhelmed with work and what was the detrimental impact for me. And then I shared with them what were some of the simple steps that I incorporated. They don't have to be about this particular workshop that we were running, but what were the simple steps that I incorporated to get out of that, to overcome that situation. What we found is that by being that open, by ensuring that everyone is aware of the expectations of them, right? By doing away with any presumptions or assumptions that would have inevitably crept up prior to coming into this room, it allows for a much more open environment by which the individuals can embrace any one of these initiatives we talked about.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll come back to this point because there's a number of questions in the chat. And before I come to those, I want to ask you a question very selfishly from me, because one of the many things I struggle with is rushing to judgment. I am naturally a very judgmental guy. And if friends, if family, if business contacts, if colleagues do not measure up to my standards, then I rush to judgment. What is your advice for someone like me what do I need to do differently to enable a better mindset, which will in turn enable a better response from all the people that I can all too easily rush to judgment about?
Okay. Thank you for asking that, Victor. So for me, and I'll again point back to the three things that we talked about, right? I mentioned three things. Don't just see, absorb. Don't just hear, but listen. And don't just feel, but reframe. Quite often what we've seen is the inability for us to do one of these three is what leads us to being judgmental or coming to a conclusion very quickly. And I'm not saying it's something that you can easily turn on or easily activate, without any practice. This all requires practice, ladies and gentlemen. This all requires a concerted effort on our individual parts. But the key thing over here, and you go back to the definition of mindfulness, is being aware, being acutely aware and living in the present moment. A lot of times our judgments are based on opinions we already have about this individual or that situation. And we've got to cut that out, right? Because those are distractions to our mind. Those are distractions, those are the noise that actually would impact our ability to form this new conclusion. And one of the things we've seen work really well is just by pausing. Sometimes that pause, we call it that golden silence, right? Whenever any situation happens, just count to 10, right? 10 seconds is not a long time. But what you find in 10 seconds, the ability for you to process or perhaps even see the situation slightly differently is magnified considerably. Remember, we talked about the visuals forming 70%, helping to form 70% of our decision. We talk about the visuals, quickest, and being able to process the most amount of data. Here's where, again, we're talking about don't just see, but absorb. Take in every aspect. Then listen and not hear what's happening. Then understand the emotional states that everyone is in or emotions that everyone is feeling, including yourself, Victor, and see how, for those three components, it can help you have that right mindset to address that situation at any point in time.
And I like this because I think it goes back to basics that each of us in our different leadership roles, and every one of us is a leader,
correct,
needs to lead, needs to take or take that responsibility to create the environment for others to thrive. And I totally get that. I think Mr. Biden President Biden in his inaugural address a few hours ago put it very well when he said that, leaders should engage not by the example of their power, but by the power of their example. And I think that is something that's very, very true. So let's go to the floor because we've got some great questions and in no particular order. Here we go. We've got one from Grant who says, how does resilience fit into your framework of mindfulness?
I would like to understand that question a bit more, Grant. So more than happy to understand a bit of the background in terms of where you're coming from with that. And look, that's what I'm practicing, actually what I just talked about, right? So by just looking at that statement, here's my initial take, but not my final one, because I would love to understand a bit more in terms of that, Grant. So how does that go? How does that build into the frame? How does that work into the framework? Very much around how we process our emotions. Renowned psychologists, lots of scientists have talked about our ability. One particular individual said that actually this whole culture of happiness at the workplace and promoting a positive attitude can sometimes be quite detrimental. While it's great that we all try to have adopt a positive attitude. While it's great, they will all need to be happy. As I said, it also leads us to hide or bury the emotions that we're feeling at that point in time. And that would then decrease our ability to become more resilient. Think about an entrepreneur who starts up, any particular company. An entrepreneur would be going through a plethora of emotions in his or her first 12 months within starting up that organization, right? There are moments where you're elated because you've got funding. There are moments where you're downright frustrated. And then, of course, there are moments that are very worrying because you don't know where your next dollar is going to come from. Now, rather than hide those negative emotions, for an entrepreneur to be able to acknowledge, feel it, understand why I am feeling, I'm not just feeling sad after this investor presentation, but I am feeling specifically demoralized or specifically discouraged. By being able to break it down and build on my emotional vocabulary and then address that or connect that to that particular situation, I then am able to address that component in a manner that befits me and in a way that allows me to, at the same time, learn from it and develop my resilience. So I hope, Grant, that helps to address your question, but love to hear a bit more from you in terms of where you're coming from with that.
Grant, do you want to unmute and just respond?
Yeah, thank you so much, Victor and Ronnie, for that. Yeah, I intentionally framed the question to be a little ambiguous to see how your thoughts would be in terms of just interpreting what the question is. Because what's going through my head right now is around, is mindfulness a necessary condition to be resilient, or is it possible to be resilient without being mindful?
I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, Grant, because for many of us, that resilience comes, for all of us, resilience comes from experience, right? If we've had the opportunity to go through a situation previously, however that situation was structured, whether it was against the odds and we came through, or whether it was simple and we came through, the more difficult it is, obviously that's where we develop our resilience, multiple fold. Right? And to many of us, it doesn't require that active practice of mindfulness. For many of us, we take that as part of the course that's part of our progression moving forward in life. So I would submit, Grant, that I think a lot of us practice mindfulness and have the ability to practice mindfulness without specifically calling out to it. Mm-hmm. Right? And if those of us who can do that, fantastic. I would love to be in that situation where I can be so resilient and, water off the duck's back and, things that happen that are not the most promising, I am still able to process that quickly and be able to move on from that. I would love to have that ability.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Here's a question from Sukan. How do we engage disengaged or reactive employees? How do we get them to step away from their insecurity and work with us? I mean, I'm just paraphrasing, but yeah, what do we do with those that are, shall we say, for politeness sake, skeptical?
Yep. Again, great point, and points back. Goes back to that example I shared earlier about people who are not so inclined to take this on, or they look at mindfulness initiative. What's that? Yet another stuff thought up by the HR organization, right? Again, it goes back to what I said. I think it is important that as leaders, as people who initiate these particular activities, is that we be the role models. We have to role model that. And that's where, the concept of being open, showing how you can be vulnerable, can help a lot of these guys feel a bit more comfortable in expressing their feelings. It can help them to reduce that level of skepticism. But it is a combination of showing your vulnerability as well as giving examples, or no, let me rephrase that, as well as showing real examples of how this has worked for other individuals, not other organizations, how this has worked for other individuals, right? We all respond to that concept whereby we don't want to be that first one. And quite often that feeling of skepticism is born out of the fact that we've been burnt in the past. So again, talk about the primal story, talk about the origin story, be able to trace the root of that and get them to understand that, look, in any one environment, any one situation, there doesn't have to be just one right answer. There could be multiple approaches towards solving the situation. And getting them to see that mindfulness as an element or as an entity is another way to think about how you have the right mindset, is another way to think about how you just develop that work-life balance. If you can give them that level of variety in terms of making it really simplified and also at the same time opening up, that helps a lot, right? I see a question over here as well that's similar from Rohaya. And Rohaya asks, how can we better support our colleagues or nearest and dearest who may not be comfortable expressing their emotions or emotional state? And guys, in Asia, you know, that ability to express our emotional state is a lot more difficult compared to some of our Western counterparts, right? We know that, right? For a lot of our cultures, it's that stiff upper lip, or it's that, you know, we cannot show our emotions because that means we would be losing face. And again, here's where I would say, try to break it down into a simple aspect. When they're not comfortable expressing the emotions, and that's when their vocabulary for emotions is limited. So if someone says, how's your day? And this is the same thing I ask my sons all the time. How was your day today? How was school? Good. And I'll pause and look and went, okay, can you tell me what elements of it was good? Why? Why do you say good? And when you break it down, you then start to surface a lot of these other aspects. And for someone who is non-committal in a response like my son is, with that as a response to that question, it allows us to get better insights into that emotional state. Because as they say, elaborate a bit more, they start to reveal a lot more unconsciously. And this is where they then start to become comfortable in expressing their emotions, even though they're not aware of it. Yeah, Rohaya, I trust that answers or helps address the question that you had asked. And His Excellency Ambassador An had also asked.
We've got a great question from Ambassador An. What is the best way to decrease mind distraction during a conversation or a discussion?
Yeah. Well, we can do that hard hand disciplinary approach and say, listen to me right now, but we can't do that, right? This goes back to what I said about the brain and the fact that there's this component called the limbic system. So the limbic system controls what we are attracted to as well as what we're distracted by in no particular way. Anything that calls out our attention will be doing this, right? Which means having that awareness of how the various stimulus around us play a part in this conversation or discussion we're having will be step one in making sure you can decrease that distraction. And I'll give you a good example with respect to visuals, right? Quite often when we are presenting something, you know, on the internet or whatever it is, or even on live environment, a slide could be very busy. It could have all the right graphics, and it could be, you know, devoid of text, and it still could be a distraction. Or when someone does a PowerPoint slide and they've got this zoom animation coming here and a wipe over here and a blind animation over there, that is a distraction that will take away the attention and the focus from the topic at hand, right? So the best way to decrease the mind distraction is to manage the various stimulus around you and even in the way you are communicating. So one example I would say, even in the way you're communicating, if you as a person, as you speak, have a lot of filler words, so not just the oohs and ahs and the ums, but there could be one particular word that you use very regularly to, join your sentences, like basically, okay, 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 okay. Those things can also be distractions to this conversation you're having. So just take an example. Okay, Victor, okay, here's what I want to do with you today. Okay, Victor, it's been the last 6 months. Okay, we want to talk to you, okay, about the performance, okay, that you have been able to do for us, okay, at the organization. So I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, ladies and gentlemen, but that's an example of how that could be limbically distracting. And as a result, our mind goes off, switched off, we're not actively listening, and therefore we're not as engaged as we want the audience to, as we want them to be.
Yes, and of course, in our own context, the overuse of words such as like and actually are major distractions when
Absolutely.
somebody's speaking and somebody is trying. So instead of focusing on the point that they're trying to make, you are inevitably focusing on the 64 times they use the word like and the 75 times they use the word actually.
Yep.
So of course they are not impactful and
Yep.
they do not connect. So yes, that is a very good point. We're running out of time, and I want to first of all just thank Ronnie and also Rita from Infinye for being members of the chamber and being kind enough to not just do a one-off, because this is such a big topic, but to do a series that you indicated in your presentation that we can look forward to. So what's next for us in this SICC Infinye series, Ronnie?
So as I showed you in the, and I can go back to that. Let me just, here we go. So what's next? Coming up in a few months' time is talking a bit more about how we communicate, but specifically, and the reason we put it this way, everyone, is to say, look, there are, again, there's an abundance of webinars and topics around how to communicate effectively, right? We have specifically stated communicate with intent because that actually brings a more specific granular component towards how we can continue on this path towards being mindful with ourselves. So following on from that, we will talk a bit more about the various aspects of empathy. Again, empathy is a word. I cannot tell you the number of articles I read online or on LinkedIn where someone points towards this. Where we're coming from with this particular aspect is how do you use your understanding of empathy in the right context, at the right time. And Rohaya, thanks for that prompt earlier on as well. In the right time, in the right context, to be able to best engage with the people that you're speaking with. And then finally, towards the end of the year, we'll finish off with our 4th installment of this series around how you can lead with integrity. For all of us, as Victor mentioned, and as I stated at the start as well, leadership is not just confined or restricted to those of us in a role that clearly states, I'm an MD or I'm a general manager. Leadership is down to each and every individual. I've come across some amazing people in my life who are individual contributors in their organization. But the way they behave, the way they're so aware, makes them a leader that is far more valuable, than the official positions that some of their managers hold, right? So thinking about leadership from that perspective, what are the values and how do you, again, leverage the right mindset? How do you take advantage of your ability to communicate with intent? And how do you also optimize your understanding of empathy to be able to continue to lead with integrity, either through role modeling or through just showcasing the best examples in a simple, digestible way?
Thank you. So we look forward to that in May, and of course we will we'll have to have a bit of a recap on developing the right mindset and,
Yep.
and do a check-in to see how we're all doing. And the way I like to look at this, this whole topic is mindfulness has a purpose, and that purpose is to be more impactful in a positive way. And each of us has that choice. The question is, are we willing to step up and be a better version of ourselves, not just to make our lives more useful, more content, to use a word I very much enjoy using, but also to benefit our teams, our businesses, and the wider community. So, Ronnie, thank you very much again.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone in the audience, and particularly those who asked questions. Thank you so much indeed. We look forward to seeing you again with Ronnie in May, but we have lots to engage and entertain you between now and then on a variety of topics. So check out our website, and don't forget, we are here to help. If you think there are topics that we should be covering, but we're not, or if you think there is an issue that we should be taking a position on, don't hesitate to let us know at heretohelp@sicc.com.sg. So from all of us, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend ahead.
You too. Bye-bye.